Good good afternoon, everyone. This is Hard Talk with Marsha Walker, and we are going to jump right in because we have a full house this afternoon. Gary, I can't drop you very good. Gary, why does it look like you're going to play football after?
Yep, I have football with Mark Riley and others shortly.
So why does Mark Riley? Who's Mark Riley?
A fella, one part of the family who can really play sports good.
Listen, I don't have time with you and football and sports and my brother. So because I was going to say we have a full house this afternoon. After Gary Griffith, we have Gavin Nicholas, and then we have Nairi Alfonso and Christopher Jackman. So we have a full house this afternoon because, of course, we had another leg of the Paria case yesterday. So we'll discuss that later on. As promised, yes, last week, Gary, persons were actually talking about, bringing on political leaders. And of course, they want to see all the political leaders sit around a table, or even if it's a virtual table where you guys all sit around your own table and we have a conversation. Let's see how we deal with everybody sitting, having a conversation. Can we be mature? Discuss the country, discuss what's best for the country. Have it live. Let the country see. We would hate to think that you're talking to the president of the UK and the president of the US and the prime minister of the UK and all these world leaders, and somebody has a hissy fit and jumps up. So let's see how persons react sitting down. So that is a call that with some of the listeners, they were typing and whatnot, asking for such a conversation to happen, and they agreed that it didn't need to be like US debate style, big hall, whatever. Let's just start with the crawl. So I'm throwing that. I know that you are ready. I'll speak to Gavin about it as well when he comes on.
It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Definitely not with the UNC, the PNM, and definitely not with that one-man political party. Was it?
We're not going to give him much airtime. I gave him airtime last week because somebody did ask what was going on, and I did have to address it because I see he called my name again today, but
he's not going to do it. He's one of those individuals. He's comfortable and confident when he could speak to a camera, to himself, shout, argue, bad talk, criticize, be erratic. That's what happened when you're a politician, but you've never achieved anything. You've never held any post. So what you do is attack, discredit, and that's why when it is that you made the request for us to have a debate, I knew that he would moonwalk like Michael Jackson. He's not going to do it. He doesn't have the ability to be calm, to be controlled, to be able to come with facts, data. And if he's cross-examined, criticized, or in any way shows his lack of understanding in a debate, he will shout, scream, and he's that individual, which is on. You know what? It's like a mini Rowley.
Well, my own may come across a little bit more racist because I've said we have an African raging bull. I really don't need a Caucasian or whatever. He calls himself a half Syrian or something. He says it all the time on his shows, So I don't know why you think that maybe we may accept that behavior a little bit more because your skin color lighter or But anyways, we have serious conversations to have. So let's move along.
Sure.
But I do appreciate you taking the time because there are other, and I'm gonna no holds barred. I have invited Michaela Pandey, and I do think that political leaders, if you want, you are up for public office. You should be on every media house, everywhere speaking, being interviewed. We want to hear from you. We want to know. And we already have one female political leader that shies away from the media, and we even friendly fire. You have to be able to answer hard questions, go wherever, whether it be a PNM, a UNC, or whoever, and face the media. So I tell people I am a little bit wary of any political leader who is not actively doing interviews for the media. So thank you very much for setting that example. The state of emergency, we have loads of calls from various stakeholders in the country even citizens, a lot of persons you're hearing that coming up all the time, that phrase, it's time for a state of emergency, it's time for a state of emergency. So that is why you are here. Let us talk the calls for a state of emergency. Are we there?
Yeah, so what? So to clarify, we keep hearing sometimes they make the recommendation, let's have a limited state of emergency. There's no such thing. It is like saying you're half pregnant. So that's to clarify the comments being made. A state of
Wait, I'm going to
emergency is
stop
when
you
a
right
proclamation.
there. I am going to stop you there because I don't want to be a hypocrite. So I want to make sure that you're not taking friendly fire. August 21st, 2011, Kamla Prasad Bisesa, then Prime Minister, labeled it a limited state of emergency. If I am
Yeah,
not
she's wrong. She's wrong. She didn't know better.
weren't you her national security advisor at that time?
At that time, I was in a line, and this was 55 minutes before I got into Space Mountain. I was in Orlando with my family, and then she gave me the call. She told me that several of them decided to call a state of emergency. I explained to her it is not relevant. A state of emergency is not a crime-fighting tool. It should not be used as a crime-fighting tool. So when she said a limited state, there's no such thing. A state, when you call a state of emergency, that goes across the whole country. What you can have in the state of emergency is a state of emergency with no curfew, a state of emergency where this Speaker of the House alone could be held under house arrest, a state of emergency with curfews in specific areas. So but that doesn't make it a limited state of emergency. As soon as the president makes that proclamation, the country is under a state of emergency. So that gives the police and full authority sometimes to go into a home without a warrant. And so we believe a state of emergency is based on a curfew or not. So they call it a limited state of emergency. No such thing. When you look at, so Kamla Prasad says, so unfortunately, she didn't understand the law. In the same manner, where it is, she recently said that during COVID, police had a two-tiered approach where they were arresting people if families were out by a beach or whatever, but people were allowed in a wedding. It's because of our ignorance and not understanding the law. The public health regulation at the time meant that Marshall Riley could have 100 people in a
I got married, Gary. My name is Marshall Walker.
Marshall Walker, sorry. Fine. Marshall Walker with 100 persons in Mother's Day of whatever event, and there's nothing that the police could have done. If 5 of them left to go on the beach, the police could arrest them. It was very stupid, but we had to adhere to the law. So it means that political leaders are not really advised. It's just like Keith Rowley, he made the same comment to say that I should arrest people by the pool in their home. It was ignorance in him not understanding the law. So that's what usually happens when political leaders make comments without being properly briefed. So as it pertains to the state of emergency, as I said, it should not be used as a crime-fighting tool. If, however, there's a clear and present danger of possible threat, assassination attempts of public figures, which is what was also claimed during 2011, then you could justify that. But you don't justify it because crime is increasing. What happens, in fact, is when you have a state of emergency, it affects the economy, it affects investment, it affects tourism, it can cause many businesses to shut down, it can then cause persons to be unemployed. That becomes a byproduct towards inflation, towards persons now being a greater need for money. It can cause an increase in crime. So it is a domino effect with a state of emergency. So you need to be very careful when you call it. In Jamaica, for example, they have something known as Zone of Special Operations, ZOSO, which is a state of emergency with a curfew in specific areas, in hotspot areas, that gives the army now some degree of better mobility and control accessibility with the police in specific areas. So those are things that we can do. If it is that the political leaders of the major parties do any research, they would have understood that when we had the Commission of Inquiry into the attempted coup, as the Minister of National Security at the time, I implemented 11 out of the 30 recommendations. One included a national alert state. National alert state can be used moving from green, amber, red, black, based on the escalation of the threat. You can now increase the presence of the law enforcement based on the clear and present danger. When you hear people say they're going to beef up security, it's not a ranch. So when there's no such thing as beefing up security, you can use a national alert state, which is what I did as Minister of National Security, and it shut down after. So those are the things that can be done. But as I said, my personal view is that a state of emergency should not be used as a crime-fighting tool. We did not have a state of emergency in 2013 and 2015, when it was the highest reduction in serious crime in 31 years. It just happened I was the Minister of National Security at the time. We did have a state of emergency in 2019 to 2021. It was the highest reduction in violent crime in 17 years. I just happened to be commissioner of police at the time. So it means you put policies, you put plans.
There was a reduction in murders. The lowest figure was under Pandey, and I don't believe there was a state of emergency then either.
Yeah, but I said last 17 years, so that left out Pandey.
But you worked under Pandey, so I mean, if you wanted to put yourself there.
Well, again, and that's why I would say the best minister of national security the country ever had was Brigadier Joseph Theodore. He was the minister at the time, and I looked at the things he did pre-2000, 1995 to 2000, and that's when the murder rate was less than 100. He was a no-nonsense guy. He didn't allow politicians to turn gang members into community leaders, giving state contracts to gangs. He dealt specifically with things using the type of technology, introducing community policing. And now, 23 odd years later, there are things that Joe Theodore did that we don't even have now. So it shows that we've actually gone back instead of moving forward. I implemented many of those things, and then the type of technology he didn't have then, using the dark web, social media monitoring, covert operators, and all of these things, unfortunately, have been shut down. So if it is you really want to reduce crime, it's not a state of emergency. A state of emergency is a knee-jerk press button panic response, and there's going to be a domino effect later on.
You spoke about Jamaica and the special zones, but you used the state. I understood where you were going until you used back the term state of emergency. Do they have something special in terms of law, policy? How did they make that happen, where the entire country isn't under state of emergency, but just that area, that town, that city?
It was an amendment to the law known as ZOSO, the Zone of Special Operations. So that specified, instead of putting a curfew, a state of emergency throughout the whole country, instead of having a curfew throughout the whole country, you give authority for the relevant arms and protective services to pinpoint specific hotspot areas where these units can now intensify their resources, their patrols, their operations in those areas, giving them positions where it is that they can actually go into homes without a warrant and so forth. It has proven to be effective anytime there is that zone of special operation in Jamaica. It is something that we can very well consider. But again, and that will take away the impact of having a nationwide state of emergency.
All right. This is the first time that I feel as though you've answered my questions and I kind of done. It's really because you have football to go to. I mean, I said 4 to 4:30. I don't understand. I should have really, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm giving Gary a half an hour to talk. This is not going to be enough. I can't start with a monologue. I can't do nothing because it's Gary and he only have a half an hour. Look at it, 4:17, and you.
Well, I can't stretch it. I can't stretch it to show that again. The state of emergency, when it is that we saw what happened in 2011, you have to be very careful with a state of emergency unless your law enforcement agencies are properly trained to understand how a state of emergency works. And if it is that the hierarchy of the law enforcement can be manipulated by politicians, you will get a repeat of what took place in 2011. 2011, you recall, because of the state of emergency, politicians obviously would have put pressure on the hierarchy of the police service, and we had hundreds of young men being arrested unlawfully, illegally. And because of that, the taxpayers, they're still paying the price. All of that has to do with the repercussions of a state of emergency. So when it is, I heard the political leader of the UNC state that, yes, she thinks that we need to call a state of emergency. Hold up, calm down. We saw what happened then. The present prime minister, he deliberately tried to avoid calling a state of emergency because he knows there are usually political repercussions in it, which is why he used public health regulations. And that is why through the public health regulations, it meant that the police did not have the authority to do what was required in a state of emergency, which is why the two political leaders of the two major political parties, based on ignorance in them both not understanding the law, both said that the police should have arrested persons in their homes during COVID, not understanding the police did not have that authority because it was not a state of emergency, it was not a curfew. And public health regulations meant that someone can have 100 people in their home, nothing could be done. But if 5 leave their home to go by the beach, something could be done. So when you heard Kamala Prasad sadly make a very foolish comment to state it was a two-tiered approach. What she did basically is to disrespect the hard-working police officers that 31 of them lost their lives unlike police services around the world during COVID, where police officers abused their authority, they were abandoned their posts. Not one police officer abandoned their post. Not one police officer went above and beyond, abused his authority or her authority. And 31 of them lost their lives. So to have a political leader who wants to be the prime minister disrespect police officers based on what they did during COVID, they had limited authority because of the public health regulation. And sadly, what this government has done is to praise 4 persons in the Ministry of Health, because what they did every Wednesday for a year is to tell people, wear masks, social distancing, and do a vaccine. And for that great work you did, Terence Dial Singh and Ruston and Mariam Richards, because of that great work, let's give you a national award. And not even a word of thanks to the police officers who would have been the front line, not the army. The army never came out. They stayed on standby. So 34 years later, the Defense Force is still on standby since 1990, waiting to justify why it is that there should be a Defense Force, which is unfortunate to them. It's not their fault. It's because politicians are ignorant to understand the role and function of the Defense Force.
What is the role and function of the Defense Force?
There are 5, the role and function, 5 different things. The 3 main that you will see is ceremonial duties, which you will know. Also to defend our country from external aggression, but there's also an aid to civil power. That aid to civil power would give them the opportunity to perform their duties based on their training. The comments made by many people that soldiers are trained to kill. Yes, we are trained to kill, but we are also trained to defend. I would know that because I was the first Trinidad and Tobago citizen to return home with a United Nations peacekeeping medal, and it's the word peacekeeping medal. So the Defense Force can very well be used to complement the police service in the performance of their duties. That it is not being done. Out of 5,000 members of the Defense Force, 500 have remained at Piarco in Air Guard for the last 5 years. They are unable to fly a chicky-chunk kite, far less anything else, because there's no aircraft and no helicopter for them. You have 1,000 in Coast Guard that have not been able to do much of anything because there are no vessels, thanks to the incompetence of this government, not understanding preventative maintenance, even though I acquired 6 Diamond vessels to do exactly what the 3 OPVs could have done, but for $1.2 billion less. And then you have 2,500 members of the Army who have all been in camp, whether it be Kamuto, Ogden, or Tetron Barracks, waiting for a war to take place, which is incorrect. They can very well operate. It's just about 100 out of that 2,500 are part of the IATF, which is the Interagency Task Force. They can do a lot more, but to do that, they need proper training. There's someone that I know very well. There's a report now where soldiers worked on a joint patrol with the police, and they pointed guns to the head of these young men and women. And those are the things that will affect the image of the Defense Force and even the police service. Unless you have mechanisms to make sure that you can prevent this through the 482 Gary online reporting, the use of your phone to record these individuals, it can destroy public trust and confidence. But going back to the Defense Force, it shows that there's a lot more that they can and should do. And I intend to do that. Let me finally add on that point. That's why Patrick Manning, he had the vision to understand the use of the Defense Force. That's why he formed the Special Anti-Crime Unit, SAUTT. What he did not do was to make the legal amendments to give them the authority, because it was led by someone who was previously in the Defense Force. And by doing that is what caused the collapse of the Special Anti-Crime Unit. I understood the value of it, which is why I piggybacked from it, and I formed the National Security Special Operation Group as a minister, and then the Special Operation Response Team as a commissioner. And that pegged back the criminal elements by having the best of the best soldiers, police officers working together, highly trained, properly polygraphed, to put fear into the criminals whilst making sure they are properly trained. If that is done, we can now see the value of the Defense Force.
So you do think that there is a space for joint patrols, but we need some more training, and we need, I guess you're saying, some special legislation is needed?
No, in the Defense Force, based on their regimental, there will be regimental police. I think your father was one, in fact. And that regimental police
when you spoke about Joe Theodore, I would say, yes.
I forgot that. Yes.
Yes, and he was actually my dad's godfather, but because they were in the army, no one knew that. Because of course, and so you spoke about Joe Theodore's hand, and he treated my dad so harshly to make sure that no one could ever accuse them of, because of that godfather relationship, that there was any favoritism and stuff. So when you said that he was the best Minister of National Security, I smiled inside, tried to keep my professional hat on, because I knew how close my dad and Joe were.
Yeah, he was a good. When I graduated as an officer, Joe Theodore was the chief of defense staff. He looked at me from head to toe, looked at everything, and I spent hours trying to prepare myself. And when I looked like I finally cracked it, and Joe Theodore was just walking away, and then he stopped. He looked around, and he found a twisted shoelace, and I lost the opportunity to leave camp for about 2 weeks because of that. Yes, that is Joe Theodore. But I had the world of respect for him. And I've noticed that the previous Attorney General is on board, so I could hand over now, and I could go and play my football.
Yes. So you see, he heard that you had football to go to, so he did you a professional courtesy, and he came on early so that you can go play football.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Take care.